If you saw yourself through their eyes, you'd know why they're terrified. The truth doesn't knock politely. It doesn't check your schedule to see if you are emotionally prepared for its arrival. It doesn't wipe its boots on the welcome mat of a fragile ego, and it certainly doesn't ask for permission to cross the threshold. Sometimes the truth simply kicks the door completely off the hinges, walks dead into the center of the room, and turns on every single blinding fluorescent light. For the vast majority of people sleepwalking through this matrix, this is a profoundly terrifying experience. You see, most people don't actually hate intelligence, and they don't hate authenticity. What they absolutely viscerally despise is what your intelligence and your authenticity make them feel about their own lives. They do not hate your light. They hate the fact that your natural, unapologetic state of being violently disrupts their carefully curated delusions and illuminates the dusty corners they have spent decades hiding in. Chosen ones, if you are listening to the sound of my voice right now, I know exactly where you are standing. You are currently navigating a profound, exhausting, and completely isolating spiritual awakening. You have been walking through the fire, shedding old restrictive versions of yourself, breaking generational curses, and elevating into a frequency that demands absolute, uncompromising authenticity. And as a direct result of your unseen heavy lifting, you are dealing with a bizarre onslaught of insecure, toxic, or highly performative individuals who are suddenly malfunctioning in your presence. They are throwing subtle, passive-aggressive jabs, desperately trying to mimic your every move, or having full-blown, unexplainable meltdowns over your quiet, steady progression. You are sitting there, minding your own spiritual business, wondering why your mere existence is triggering such an intense, chaotic, and hostile reaction from people who claim to have it all together. I am here to validate that heavy, confusing reality. You are not crazy. You are not overthinking it. You are simply witnessing the terrified, frantic exposure of the unhealed human ego. The overarching premise of this entire dynamic is actually terrifyingly simple. These people are exposing themselves because you are reflecting a reality they cannot handle. They are secretly competing with a version of you that only exists in their deeply insecure minds, realizing that their entire external performance is completely useless against your internal alignment. If you could step outside of your own physical body for just a moment, if you could borrow their deeply flawed, fear-based perception and look back at yourself, everything would suddenly make perfect sense. If you saw yourself through their eyes, you would immediately understand the sheer scale of your own spiritual magnitude. You would know exactly why they are absolutely terrified of you. Let's get into it. Let's break down exactly why your internal architecture is causing their external collapse. Number one, if you saw yourself through their eyes, you would finally know why they are terrified. The fundamental reality of your situation is that you are viewing your own journey through the lens of your past struggles, while they are viewing your journey through the lens of your present, undeniable aura. The stark contrast here lies entirely between your authentic, hard-earned, internal alignment and their borrowed, insecure, performative, and externally validated facade. You intimately know the nights you cried yourself to sleep, the moments of crippling doubt, the grueling isolation, and the sheer grit it took to heal your dysregulated nervous system. But they do not see the internal battles. They only see the impenetrable, unshakable confidence that resulted from them. They have constructed their entire identity around a fragile house of cards, constantly looking over their shoulder to make sure the world is clapping for their daily performance. You, on the other hand, do not need an audience to exist. You do not require a crowd to validate your worth. The deep psychology here is rooted in their profound fear of a total loss of control and an overwhelming, suffocating sense of inadequacy. When they look at you, they are looking at a walking anomaly that defies every single rule of their shallow transactional matrix. They need external validation just to breathe. You simply breathe. This triggers a catastrophic loss of leverage on their end. Their fragile ego is hemorrhaging because they realize they cannot buy, manipulate, shame, or intimidate someone who is entirely self-sourced. They operate on a script that dictates that human beings are hollow vessels needing to be filled by society, and your self-sustaining spiritual ecosystem proves their script is entirely fraudulent. They are terrified because your existence forces them to realize that their survival strategy is flawed. To understand this dynamic visually, imagine someone meticulously stacking a house of wet playing cards on a windy patio table, constantly complaining about the breeze, demanding that everyone stop breathing too heavily, and begging the crowd to pity their fragile structure. Meanwhile, they look across the street and see you quietly, consistently stacking heavy brick and mortar on solid bedrock. For a long time, while you were digging the foundation in the dirt, they felt taller than you. But now, their cards are swaying in the wind, and they are forced to stand shivering in the rain while they watch you drink coffee inside the indestructible fortress you built from your pain. They hate you, your bricks, because your solid foundation proves that their wet cards were a choice. This is exactly why their behavior looks so incredibly goofy, frantic, and tragic from the outside. They are scrambling to pick up wet, ruined playing cards and desperately tape them back together, all while screaming that your house is somehow fake, that you got lucky, or that you think you are better than them. You must linger on the sheer tragedy of their predicament. They are completely paralyzed by the realization that your internal architecture is permanent, while their external performance is temporary. They are terrified because if they acknowledge the realness of your alignment, they must confess their own fraudulence, and their unhealed egos would rather wage a pathetic, one-sided war on your truth than accept their own lies. Number 2, they never expected you to survive the wilderness. They left you. And there is a dark, hidden truth about the people who secretly compete with you and monitor your life from the shadows. Many of them actively banked on your failure. When you were navigating your darkest and most agonizing seasons, they did not offer genuine support. They orchestrated your isolation, or they quietly withdrew their presence precisely when you needed it the most. The contrast between your quiet resurrection and their current panic is undeniably stark. Your internal architecture was forged in the fire of genuine suffering and brutal self-reflection, meaning it cannot be melted by their petty judgments or passive-aggressive remarks. Their identity, however, is a flimsy papier-mâché construct held together by the cheap glue of other people's failures. They believed that without their network, their guidance, and their approval, you would spiritually and mentally starve. The deep psychological truth driving their erratic behavior is that they are experiencing profound, agonizing buyer's remorse for the mask they wore around you. They fear the loss of control that comes with your sudden, undeniable ascension. Their fragile ego relies heavily on a rigid hierarchy where they are safely perched on top and you are securely tucked away at the bottom. By emerging whole, healed, and undeniably powerful, you strip them of their favorite delusion of superiority. They are deeply terrified because they realize that if you can survive their betrayal, their abandonment, and their worst intentions. They have absolutely no leverage left over you. They expected a ghost, but you gave them a warrior, and they do not know how to fight a warrior. Metaphorically, they're like someone who locked you in a barren, scorching desert, fully expecting you to wither away into dust. They sit comfortably in their artificial, temperature-controlled greenhouse, waiting for the news of your demise so they can offer fake condolences. But instead of dying, you learned how to strike the rock until water flowed. You learned how to survive on mana, and you walked out of that desert not as a victim, but as a sovereign force of nature. Now they have to watch you build an oasis in the exact spot they thought would be your grave. They are standing in their plastic greenhouse, looking at your massive, sprawling garden, absolutely bewildered by your survival. From the outside, their behavior looks entirely goofy and deeply frantic. They are frantically trying to rebuild a new dynamic, acting overly friendly, trying to attach themselves to your new success, or suddenly acting like they were your biggest cheerleader all along. They are exhausting themselves, trying to rewrite history, because they are terrified that your survival guarantees their exposure. They know you remember exactly who they were when you were bleeding. They see the calm, but they do not understand the sheer brutal alchemy that took place in your darkest hours. You took their poison and turned it into your power, leaving them utterly defenseless against your ongoing success. Number 3, your silence acts as a deafening acoustic chamber that magnifies their insecurities. We live in a loud, chaotic era where everyone is loudly broadcasting their moves, over-explaining their motives, and constantly fighting for the microphone just to prove they exist. Insecure, toxic people use noise as a shield. They talk constantly, gossip relentlessly, and manufacture drama to fill the terrifying void of their own internal emptiness. You, on the other hand, have mastered the devastating, impenetrable art of unbothered silence. Contrast your authentic, grounded, deep-water peace with their frantic, loud and chaotic need for constant energetic exchange. Your internal alignment does not require a verbal defense. When they try to provoke you, smear you, or drag you into their chaotic mud pit, your response is often nothing, just pure, absolute, terrifying silence. The deep psychological terror they experience in the face of your silence is rooted in a profound loss of control and the starvation of their ego. Narcissistic and highly insecure people view attention, even negative, angry attention, as concrete proof of their own existence and superiority. By giving them absolutely nothing, you are not just ignoring them. You are energetically erasing them from your reality. You are stripping them of the remote control they thought they held over your nervous system. Their fear stems from the realization that they can scream, scheme, and throw tantrums, but they cannot penetrate your energetic field. This causes a frantic short-circuiting in their brain, because the script they wrote requires you to act the victim, to defend yourself, and to look crazy. When you refuse to read your lines, their entire production falls apart. It is exactly like someone screaming into a deep, dark cavern, desperately expecting to hear the satisfying boom of an echo to validate their powerful voice. They throw heavy rocks into your ocean expecting a massive, violent tidal wave to crash back onto the shore. But your waters are so unimaginably deep that they simply swallow the stones without a single ripple. The canyon does not echo back. It just absorbs their noise and remains grand, quiet, and ancient. The person screaming eventually realizes how small, pathetic, and utterly insignificant they sound in the face of such massive serenity. From a psychological standpoint, watching them try to provoke you now is a pure tragic comedy. It is frantic, desperate, and deeply embarrassing for everyone forced to watch. They will post passive-aggressive quotes on social media. They will try to triangulate you with mutual acquaintances, and they will perform these elaborate, highly visible theatrical displays of how unbothered they are, all while sweating profusely, constantly checking over their shoulder to see if you are watching. But you aren't watching. You are building your empire. Your silence acts as a giant, terrifying mirror that reflects their own noise right back at them, forcing everyone around them to finally see how erratic and unhinged they truly are. Number 4, you force them to confront the authentic potential they abandoned for comfort. Your sheer existence operates as a massive, unavoidable, and deeply uncomfortable audit of their life choices. Contrast your raw, courageous commitment to your divine calling with their cowardly submission to the societal script. You have done the grueling, terrifying work of facing your demons, breaking generational curses, and seeking truth over convenience. You risked isolation to find alignment. They, conversely, traded their highest potential for cheap applause and comfortable stagnation. They settled for the path of least resistance, choosing to perform for the crowd rather than do the heavy lifting in the dark. Their entire persona is a heavily mortgaged illusion based on the assumption that true greatness and true healing are impossible myths. The deep psychological trigger causing their meltdown is an overwhelming, suffocating surge of suppressed guilt and shame, which they immediately weaponize and project outward onto you as resentment. They cannot be angry at themselves for abandoning their own dreams, because that would require taking accountability, an act that is completely lethal to a fragile, performative ego. So they must be angry at you for having the audacity to actually fulfill yours. They fear the agonizing stagnation they have trapped themselves in, yet they project that fear onto you. They have to find flaws in you. They have to tear down your achievements, and they have to minimize your light. Because if they admit that your path is real and valid, they simultaneously have to admit that their entire life is a cowardly lie. Think of their life like a dusty, abandoned mansion where all the furniture is covered in white sheets and the windows are permanently boarded up. They convince themselves that everyone lives this way, that the dark and the dust are just the natural, realistic state of the modern world. Then you move in next door. You build a vibrant, deeply illuminated cabin from scratch. You chop the wood, you light the fire, and the warmth of your radiant glow spills over onto their property. The light shining through the cracks of their boarded-up windows does not inspire them. It horrifies them. It forces them to see the dust, the cobwebs, and the absolute ruin of their own internal world. They do not want to clean their house. They want to throw a rock through your window to put out your fire. This is why their passive-aggressive remarks, their backhanded compliments, and their constant need to downplay your achievements look so frantic and tragic. They are desperately throwing pebbles at your stained glass windows, hoping to ruin the art so they do not have to confront the reality that they threw away their own paintbrushes a long time ago. They are mourning the versions of themselves they were too cowardly to become. And their hostility is just the goofy, flailing tantrum of a ghost that is furious at you for choosing to actually live. They see the confidence but not the internal battles. They see the elevation but not the sacrifice. Number 5. Your internal architecture exposes the rotting foundation of their curated avatar. In this modern, highly superficial world, Performative people are completely used to being able to fake absolutely everything. They can buy fake followers to simulate influence. They can rent luxury cars for a day to simulate wealth. They can memorize a few philosophical quotes to simulate depth. And they can mimic the aesthetic of success. But what they absolutely cannot mimic is the deep, resonant, vibrational frequency of a chosen one who has actually done the grueling dark night of the soul work. Contrast your deep, heavy, resonant truth with their frantic, flimsy, copy-and-paste persona. You are operating from a massive, overflowing cup of self-worth, deep healing, and divine connection. They are operating from a bottomless black hole of insecurity, envy, and severe identity diffusion. The psychology of the toxic imitator is driven by profound, crippling imposter syndrome and an intense fear of exposure. When they look at you, they see an internal peace and an invisible magnetic authority that draws people, opportunities, and profound blessings toward you without you ever having to force it or manipulate it. Because they are terrified of their own stagnation, they try to observe your physical habits to steal your spiritual blueprint. They will suddenly copy how you dress. They will start using the exact phrases you use. They will suddenly take an interest in your obscure hobbies, and they will try to infiltrate your network. But it always, inevitably, falls entirely flat. It feels hollow. It feels like a small child wearing their parents' oversized business suit, waiting for someone to take them seriously. Metaphorically, it is like watching someone paint a flimsy, wet cardboard box with metallic gray paint and frantically trying to convince the entire world that it is a solid titanium bank vault. One drop of rain, one slight inconvenience, one gust of wind, and their cardboard reality completely caves in, while your solid steel remains completely untouched. They are furiously angry that your foundation can withstand earthquakes, while their foundation collapses under a slight breeze. They wanted the crown without fighting the dragon, and now they look ridiculous wearing plastic tiaras while you wield the actual sword of truth. They look intensely frantic and deeply goofy as they constantly shift their personalities to match whatever room they are in, sweating through their costumes, while you remain a sturdy, unmovable oak tree in every single environment. They are terrified of you because your authentic, unshakable existence constantly reminds them that they are nothing but a cheap counterfeit. They are staring at the horrifying truth that there are no shortcuts to spiritual weight. The universe absolutely does not bless counterfeits, and your presence forces them to audit their own profound emptiness. Number 6. You refuse to play the subordinate role in their carefully scripted theatrical production. Toxic and performative people do not actually have genuine relationships. They cast actors for their personal plays. They assign everyone around them a highly specific role designed to uphold their fragile self-image. They need the lesser-than friend to make them feel attractive, the chaotic friend to make them feel stable, and the submissive friend to make them feel powerful. For a while, they might have tried to cast you in one of these subordinate roles. Contrast your absolute refusal to participate in the theater of the absurd with their desperate need to direct the narrative. You operate from a place of divine alignment, meaning your actions are dictated by your internal moral compass and spiritual truth, not by the social expectations of insecure directors. This causes a profound psychological short-circuit in their minds. For someone whose entire identity is built on manipulating social dynamics, a person who cannot be manipulated is the ultimate existential threat. Their fear is rooted in an absolute loss of control and a severe narcissistic injury. If they cannot control how you perceive them, and they cannot control how you react to them, they are suddenly left entirely powerless in the dynamic. They handed you a script filled with self-doubt, people-pleasing, and codependency, and they fully expected you to step onto the stage and deliver your lines exactly as written, when you didn't just forget your lines, but set the script on fire and walked out of the theater entirely. They were left standing on stage, looking foolish. Imagine a grand, ridiculous stage play where someone is stomping around in a massive plastic crown, demanding that all the other actors bow down and pretend the cardboard castle is real. Everyone is playing along, sweating under the hot stage lights, terrified of upsetting the fake king. Then there is you. You wander onto the stage, look at the plastic crown, look at the flimsy cardboard walls, yawn, and calmly walk straight off the stage, through the audience, and out the front doors into the real, warm sunshine. You don't argue with the king. You just leave the theater. From the outside, the fake king's reaction is deeply embarrassing and tragic. They are standing there, screaming at the top of their lungs, demanding you return to the stage to validate their royal status, while you are already miles away, breathing fresh air. They are frantically deploying flying monkeys to drag you back into the drama, but you are unreachable. They are terrified because you broke the spell, and once the spell is broken, everyone else might start noticing the castle is made of cardboard. You expose the fragility of their entire production just by refusing to participate in it. Number 7. They are horrified to discover your magnetism cannot be plagiarized or purchased. As a chosen one, you have likely noticed that without even trying, you effortlessly attract opportunities, genuine connections, favorable circumstances, and divine favor. People are naturally drawn to your warmth, your depth, your lack of pretense, and your quiet confidence. Contrast this organic, deeply spiritual magnetism with their exhausting, mechanical, highly calculated hustle. They have to scheme, plot, flatter, and manipulate constantly just to get a fraction of the respect you receive simply by breathing in a room. Their entire social strategy is transactional. They view relationships as a ledger of debts and favors, a game of chess where everyone is just a pawn to be sacrificed for their own advancement. Your reality, however, is built on effortless, vibrational attraction. The deep psychology behind their burning resentment is the terrifying realization that they cannot buy, fake, or steal the spiritual anointing that rests on your life. This terrifies them down to the marrow of their bones. They genuinely believe that life is a mathematical equation. If they wear the right designer clothes, memorize the right buzzwords, mimic the right aesthetic, and hang around the right influential people, they will automatically be the center of attention and command respect. But then you show up. You do not follow their superficial rules. You do not wear their heavy masks. And yet, the energetic gravity in the room undeniably shifts toward you. This absolutely shatters their worldview. Metaphorically, their behavior is like someone frantically trying to tape metal shavings to their own body so that people will stick to them, completely baffled and enraged as to why you, a natural, solid-state, massive magnet, effortlessly pull everything toward you without moving a single muscle. You just sit there, anchored in your truth, and the metal naturally comes to you. They run around covered in cheap glue, sweating profusely, exhausted from the performance, wondering why everything eventually falls off of them the moment the weather changes. It is a wildly goofy and deeply pathetic spectacle to witness. Because they cannot generate their own magnetism, they will try to mimic yours. They will steal your vocabulary, copy your projects, try to infiltrate your friend groups, and replicate your style, hoping that the external copy will grant them the internal power, but it will always, inevitably, fall flat. It always looks like a cheap knockoff because the engine inside you cannot be pirated. They see your light, but they don't have the spiritual wiring to plug into the source. They are trapped in an endless loop of frantic calculation while you effortlessly attract your destiny. Number 8. Your continual evolution highlights their chronic stagnation and triggers an existential crisis. A chosen one exists in a state of perpetual, divinely orchestrated evolution, constantly outgrowing old environments to step into higher timelines. You are entirely willing to shed old versions of yourself, even when the shedding process is agonizing, because you inherently understand that spiritual growth demands sacrifice. Contrast this dynamic, unstoppable momentum with their violent, stubborn commitment to their own stagnation. They have anchored their entire identity to a specific era of their life, perhaps their high school glory days, a past relationship where they held power, or an outdated version of themselves that once garnered them a little bit of applause. When you evolve, you completely break the unspoken contract you had with them to remain small. The deep psychological terror they experience is the primal fear of obsolescence and being left behind. By moving forward, you are implicitly telling them that the place they are standing is no longer good enough. They feel abandoned, not physically, but energetically. Your upward trajectory proves that movement is possible, which immediately destroys their favorite, comfortable excuse that this is just how life is. Their fragile ego perceives your personal growth not as a victory for you, but as a direct, targeted insult to them. They rely on a script where everyone stays miserable together, bonding over shared traumas and shared complaints. By choosing to heal and evolve, you are effectively breaking the trauma bond. Metaphorically, it is as if you were both standing in a stagnant, mosquito-infested swamp. For a long time, they convinced you that this muddy swamp was the entire universe, that the murky water was all there was to drink. But one day, you decided to walk up the bank. You hacked your way through the thick jungle, enduring the scratches, the doubt, and the exhaustion, until you found a rushing, crystal-clear, purifying river. You invite them to come up, but they refuse, because the climb looks too hard. Instead, they sit in the swamp and scream that your river is fake, that you think you are better than them, and that you will eventually come crawling back to the mud. Their behavior is a frantic, goofy attempt to preserve their illusion. They will try to remind you of who you used to be. They will bring up your past mistakes, your old embarrassing moments, or the time when you were just as broken as they are. They do this because if they can drag your avatar back to the past in their own minds, they do not have to deal with the terrifying reality of your present elevation. Your continued growth is a literal spiritual eviction notice to their complacency, and they are tragically fighting to keep their lease in the mud. They see the elevation, but not the sacrifice. They see the peace, but not the warfare required to secure it. Number 9. You metabolize pain into raw power, while they weaponize trauma for cheap pity. We live in a culture that has deeply romanticized victimhood. Many people build their entire identity around what has been done to them, the trauma they have experienced, and the disadvantages they were handed. Contrast your spiritual alchemy with their chronic victimhood. When betrayal, failure, or heartbreak strikes you, you do not set up a tent in the valley of despair. You sit with the pain, you process it, and you metabolize it. You throw the pain into the furnace of your spirit, and you use it as raw fuel to forge an even sharper, stronger, more formidable version of yourself. The people secretly competing with you do absolutely none of this. They use their pain as a currency to buy sympathy, excuses, and a permanent pass to avoid doing the heavy lifting of life. The psychological devastation this causes them is rooted in the destruction of their fragile ego's favorite excuse. When they look at you, they are violently confronted with a terrifying truth. You went through the exact same fire they did, but instead of burning up and becoming ash, you forged yourself into an indestructible sword. This highlights their profound laziness and spiritual cowardice. They expect pain to break them, and they expect it to break you. When they see you go through a devastating season, a season they secretly hoped would finally destroy you, and you emerge from it glowing, elevated, and moving with terrifying purpose, it completely shatters their worldview. Use this highly descriptive metaphor. They treat their pain like a massive, toxic landfill in the center of their town. They build fences around it. They charge people admission to come look at how terrible it smells, and they constantly complain that the garbage is ruining their life. Yet they absolutely refuse to clean it up. You, however, treat your pain like a raging furnace in the belly of a massive locomotive. You shovel the betrayal, the rejection, and the heartbreak directly into the fire, and it propels your train forward at breakneck speed. They are standing in their garbage dump, choking on the toxic fumes, watching your train blow past them, furiously angry that the exact same material they let rot is the material you used to accelerate. They wanted a weeping victim they could pity and control. You gave them a warrior they cannot even touch, and they are terrified of your sword. They look goofy and deeply bitter, constantly reciting the history of their wounds to anyone who will listen, desperately seeking a cheap pity that you never asked for. They are terrified because your beautifully healed scars are infinitely more powerful and magnetic than their open, festering wounds. Number 10. Your unbothered neutrality absolutely starves their parasitic need for manufactured chaos. If you observe the people who are trying to compete with or bring you down, you will notice a deeply unsettling pattern in how they relate to others. They do not know how to connect through peace, mutual respect, or shared joy. Contrast your heavily regulated, grounded nervous system with their frantic, vibrating, trauma-bonded methods of connection. Their entire social network is built entirely on shared hatred, relentless gossiping, and manufactured chaos. They need a common enemy to feel close to their friends. They need drama to feel alive. When they attempted to bring you into their fold, they did so by throwing out bait, a juicy piece of gossip, a passive-aggressive comment, or a manufactured crisis, fully expecting you to eagerly grab it and join in the frenzy. The deep psychological terror they feel in this dynamic is akin to absolute emotional starvation. These people are psychic vampires. They feed entirely off of emotional reactivity. If they make you angry, they win. If they make you sad, they win. If they make you defensive, they win. But your unbothered neutral silence provides them with absolutely zero caloric intake. They are starving in your presence. Furthermore, your peaceful refusal to engage holds up a terrifying mirror to the pathetic nature of their relationships. They realize deep down that without drama, they have absolutely nothing to talk about. Without a mutual enemy, their friendships would dissolve overnight. You force them to recognize the profound emptiness of their chaotic existence. Imagine someone running up to you, completely out of breath, carrying a massive bucket of gasoline, screaming that the world is on fire, and expecting you to strike a match and join the panic. Instead of grabbing a match, you calmly hand them a glass of cool water, tell them to sit down, and absolutely refuse to acknowledge the imaginary fire. They look completely ridiculous. They are standing there, dripping in their own toxic fuel, vibrating with unspent, frantic energy, while you are quietly reading a book in a flame-retardant suit. They are terrified because they realize they cannot infect you with their sickness. And worse, they realize that your cure, actual boring, steady peace, is something they do not have the discipline to swallow. From the outside, it is a profoundly embarrassing spectacle. They escalate their behavior, trying to provoke a reaction, looking like frantic children throwing a tantrum in a silent library. They see your calm neutrality not as peace, but as a devastating rejection of their entire chaotic way of life. Number 11. They cannot predict the next move of a person who is entirely led by the spirit. Manipulative, highly insecure people view human interaction as a highly predictable game of chess. They study people's vulnerabilities, track their behavioral patterns, and figure out exactly which emotional buttons to push to guarantee a specific reaction. They feel incredibly safe in this illusion of absolute control. Contrast their rigid, predictable, algorithm-based existence with your fluid, multidimensional, divine alignment. They attempted to place you on their chessboard, that they assigned you a piece. They calculated your moves, and they initiated their standard manipulative strategies, fully expecting you to march right into their carefully laid traps. But you are no longer operating on a trauma-based algorithm. You are led entirely by the spirit. This causes a complete psychological breakdown for the manipulator. The ultimate nightmare for a control freak is a completely unpredictable variable. They are deeply terrified of you because they have absolutely no idea what you are going to do next. You don't make logical sense to a manipulator because your moves are not dictated by ego, fear, or a desire to please. You might suddenly walk away from a highly lucrative situation just because the energy felt off. You might remain completely silent when they expect you to defend yourself. You might suddenly pivot in a direction that absolutely no one saw coming. You have removed yourself from the two-dimensional chessboard entirely and are operating in an airspace they do not possess the radar to track. Metaphorically, their behavior is akin to a deeply arrogant scientist running around a vast, open field with a small, flimsy butterfly net, furiously trying to capture a massive Category 5 hurricane. They are screaming at the wind, demanding that it follow the laws of their tiny little net. They look completely unhinged. They are frantically charting graphs, predicting your downfall, and trying to orchestrate your ruin, while you are simply flowing, expanding, and naturally reorganizing the landscape of your life with unstoppable, wind-like force. They cannot bribe you because you don't value their currency. They cannot intimidate you because you do not fear their consequences. They cannot shame you because you have already forgiven yourself. You are a wild, untamed, spiritual force moving with the absolute fluidity of water. Their rigid, mechanical attempts to control you keep snapping in half against your flexibility. They are terrified because they are finally realizing that human hands cannot bind a person who has surrendered entirely to the wind of divine purpose. Number 12. You expose the fragility of their external attachments by thriving without them. We live in a matrix that demands the worship of highly specific, entirely superficial idols, perceived status, material wealth, aesthetic perfection, exclusive social circles, and proximity to perceived power. Contrast your profound non-attachment with their desperate clinging to these external markers. The people who are having meltdowns over your success have sacrificed their morals, their peace, their authentic selves, and their actual happiness at the altar of these fake idols. They have spent decades clawing their way to the middle of the pack, genuinely thinking that once they acquired the cars, the status, and the followers, they would finally feel a sense of internal peace. But they don't. They just feel trapped. The psychological dynamic at play here is massive, unbearable cognitive dissonance. When they look at you, a person who may have materially less than them, but who is spiritually overflowing, their entire worldview collapses. They look at their expensive, highly curated lives and realize they are miserable. They look at your simple, aligned life and realize you are incredibly fulfilled. This triggers an intense, terrifying realization. They have wasted their entire lives chasing an illusion. Their hatred toward you is essentially displaced anger at themselves for falling for the scam. They desperately need you to be miserable, poor, and begging for a scrap of their success. Because if you are happy without their matrix, it proves that their matrix is nothing but a prison. They are quite literally sitting inside a maximum security prison cell. But the bars are made of solid gold, and the floor is lined with designer carpets. They have spent years bragging to everyone outside about how shiny their bars are. Then they look out the tiny barred window and see you walking barefoot in an open field, feeling the wind on your face, going wherever you please, completely unburdened. The absolute tragedy of their existence is that instead of asking you how to unlock the door, they stand at the window screaming at you, trying to convince you that the grass in your open field is ugly and that you are missing out. They look goofy, frantic, and deeply sad because they are obsessively polishing the bars of the cage. They don't even realize they have the power to leave. They are terrified because your absolute detachment from worldly validation renders all their worldly achievements totally powerless in your presence. Number 13, they realize your blinding light is generated internally, not merely reflected. There are two distinct types of illumination in this world: generators and reflectors. Performative people, toxic manipulators, and insecure competitors are entirely reflectors. They possess absolutely no internal power source. Contrast your infinite, self-sustaining energy with their parasitic dependency. They require an external spotlight, drama, attention, validation, or the stolen energy of other people to bounce off them so they can appear bright to the world. When the room goes dark, they go completely dark. But as a chosen one, you are a generator. Your spirit is deeply and inextricably connected to the divine power grid. You do not need a spotlight to shine. You produce your own light from the inside out. You bring the light into the dark rooms, rather than waiting for the room to light you up. The deep psychology of their fear is the horrifying realization of their own impotence. If someone is a reflector, you can easily control them by simply turning off the spotlight. You can manage their ego, manipulate their emotions, and dictate their behavior by withholding attention. But how do you manipulate a sun? How do you threaten a star with darkness? You cannot. They are terrified of you because you are entirely self-sufficient in the spirit realm. They know that no matter what lies they tell, what rumors they spread, or how hard they try to ostracize you, you will simply continue to glow. Your unstoppable nature makes them feel incredibly small, irrelevant, and powerless. Metaphorically, they are a massive, expensive mirror standing in the middle of a room. They look impressive when the lights are on, arrogant enough to take credit for the brightness of the room. You walk in as a quiet, unassuming, but intensely burning lantern. Suddenly the mirror is just reflecting your light. They absolutely hate this. They want to be the source. But they know they are just glass and silver backing. If you walk out of the room, they are plunged back into absolute darkness. They look frantic and goofy, trying to position themselves in front of you, desperately trying to steal the credit for the warmth in the room. They are furious that they need you to feel warm, while you do not need them for anything at all. They see the radiance, but not the internal discipline. They see the glow, but not the grueling spiritual mechanics required to keep it lit. They are terrified because they cannot unplug you, because your plug is connected to the Most High, not to their fleeting opinions. Number 14, you do not seek revenge, which deprives them of the only battlefield. They know how to fight on the final, most devastating psychological blow to your haters and imitators is your absolute, unshakable refusal to seek revenge. Toxic people are fully prepared for a war. They spend their lives gathering ammunition, storing grievances, and planning counterattacks. Contrast your elevated, peaceful detachment with their desperate need for petty, vindictive warfare. They want you to get down in the mud with them. They want you to trade insults, spread counter-rumors, and try to destroy their lives, just as they tried to destroy yours. If you fight back on their level, it validates their behavior. It tells them that their actions were significant enough to pull you off your throne. But you do not step off your throne. The psychology behind their absolute meltdown is the terror of ultimate irrelevance and the agonizing weight of poetic justice. By refusing to seek revenge, you deny them the battlefield they spent years preparing. You leave them standing in the rain, dressed in full armor, holding weapons they cannot use against an enemy who simply walked away to go build an empire. They are terrified because they realize the universe is already handling your defense with a level of cosmic justice that your human hands could never orchestrate. Your lack of retaliation is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of supreme confidence in the divine laws of reaping and sowing. It is exactly like a jealous blacksmith who hates a rival warrior. The blacksmith takes a heavy, brutal hammer and violently beats a piece of raw iron, hoping to smash it into useless dust so the warrior will have nothing to fight with. But the blacksmith is so blinded by jealous rage that he doesn't realize the iron is sitting on an anvil and he is standing next to a roaring forge. With every hateful strike of his hammer, he isn't destroying the metal. He is folding it, hardening it, and shaping it. When he finally steps back, exhausted and panting, he hasn't created dust. He has accidentally forged an indestructible, razor-sharp sword, and he has just handed it directly to the warrior he wanted to kill. From the outside, their frantic hatred looks like the exhaustion of that foolish blacksmith. They wanted to play the role of the executioner in your story, but they are absolutely horrified to realize they merely played the role of the unpaid construction worker who inadvertently helped build your empire. They are terrified of you now because they know exactly how sharp you are. After all, they are the ones who accidentally sharpened you. Your refusal to strike back leaves them to bleed out on the sharp edges of their own guilty conscience. When you zoom out and look at the grand, sweeping architecture of all of this, one absolute truth becomes entirely impossible to ignore. This entire dynamic, the mimicking, the chaotic, frantic behavior, the subtle jabs, and the desperate attempts to tear you down, has absolutely nothing to do with your physical actions. It has never been about what you wear, the job you have, the specific words you say, or how you live your day-to-day life. It has always, from the very beginning, been about your energy. You are engaged in spiritual warfare, masked as mundane social drama. The people targeting you are not attacking your personality. Their unhealed demons are simply throwing a violent tantrum in the presence of your blinding light and divine peace. They are targeting your unshakable alignment because it threatens their entire illusion. Therefore, chosen ones, your ultimate empowerment lies in the absolute release of any desire to prove yourself to them. You do not need to fight back. You do not need to lower your vibration to make their insecurities feel comfortable, and you certainly do not need to seek revenge. Your growth is your revenge. Your unbothered peace is your ultimate retaliation. Let them watch from the sidelines. Let them squirm in the acoustic chamber of your silence. Let them exhaust themselves, swinging their little hammers against your solid bricks. Your only job is to remain deeply anchored in your authenticity, to continue building your internal architecture, and to keep walking unapologetically in the light that makes their shadows run for cover. Keep your peace and guard your energy. If this deeply analytical breakdown resonated with your spirit today, I need you to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to help push this frequency out to other chosen ones who desperately need to hear it. Drop a comment below with what point hit you hardest. Let's build a record of truth in the comment section. And please, share this video with someone who is currently walking through the fire and needs a reminder of just how undeniably powerful they truly are. Keep your peace, keep your power, and never apologize for the light you carry. Stay chosen. Stay blessed.